A story that has gone particularly viral is that Canada is preparing for the U.S. to descend into civil war. Ladies and gentlemen, we're back here at Timcast with another Civil War story. We did talk about this a little bit last night on Timcast IRL, but now there's a lot more news popping up around the prospect of a second American Civil War. I don't know exactly what it would look like. I have some ideas and some theories, but I will stress to all of you, as often as we do talk about it on this show and on Timcast IRL, which is not literally all that often, but it does come up quite a bit, it is all based on this. I have for you what I think 6 mainstream corporate press or activist outlets warning that a second civil war may be coming from different perspectives. First, we have Snopes trying to debunk the notion that Canada is scared of this, but Politico did report that Canada put out a research document about what to prepare for, and though they think a civil war is improbable, it is possible, and they're concerned about it. More importantly, however, the Telegraph says we are lurching towards a civil war, and the Financial Times suggests investors need to start preparing and thinking about what a civil war in the United States will mean for their investments. Oh boy! And then I have an activist source for you that argues it's actually the right and Donald Trump that are trying to foment civil war. In fact, it's already begun, they say. Now, I do love this from Snopes because they're desperately trying to downplay what's actually happening. Canada preparing for a second U.S. Civil War? Question mark? There's no question mark. Politico has the story. Canada's big worry, a U.S. Civil War. Justin Trudeau probably won't ask Joe Biden if the U.S. is headed towards for a war between the states, but a report from within this government says it's time for Canada to get ready. I will stress, as I often do to everybody who pays attention, I do not believe a war between states makes any kind of sense. It made sense before we had a strong federal government. And the first Civil War was basically more akin to World War I pre-industrial scale. World War I, it is still a bit different, but each state effectively was its own sovereign nation. Effectively. Many of them had their own currencies, but back then they had their own banks. And, we traded with each other, but there was a period where states had their own currencies, of course. They had their own police, their own jurisdictions. The federal government was very weak. So when the federal government made moves that were viewed as overstepping the bounds of the Constitution, the states basically said, to war it is. The story of the Civil War is particularly more complicated than that. Basically, southern states were concerned Abraham Lincoln was going to ban slavery, so they decided to draft their own constitution, which allowed slavery. And we can get into more of the details in the first Civil War. But this was basically states being like, look, we are sovereign states. We'll be left alone. Now, I tell you, the interesting transformation that occurred after the U.S. Civil War, they say it goes like this. Before the Civil War, people would say the United States are, meaning each state was a united. It was a plural. But afterwards, they said the United States is, meaning it's now singular. But the greatest example of how you can tell that we went from a nation comprised of sovereign states to a nation with, county jurisdictions, you can call them, is West Virginia. West Virginia, of course, was a part of Virginia. They seceded from the Union. West Virginia seceded from Virginia to join the Union. Afterwards, Virginia sued to get the territory back into Virginia, and the Supreme Court said no. That's right. What was supposed to be a sovereign state was now subjugated and denied its own territory following this conflict. The federal government now reigned supreme. That was interesting. Well, let's get back to the news, and I'll show you where we're at. What's fascinating, we talked about this last night, Canada is worried about a U.S. Civil War. But what's more interesting to me is, from the Financial Times, the sell side obviously isn't talking about a second U.S. Civil War, should it? The case for a case. Oh, yeah. They're basically saying, this is amazing. Investors, have you considered what a second Civil War can mean for your portfolio? Texas is talking about launching its own stock exchange. I kind of feel like we're gearing up for severance. Now, I don't know that it is a planned thing and that people intend for it to happen. They want it to happen. I'm just saying it looks like it's underway. Let's start here with the story from Politico magazine. They say, When Justin Trudeau meets Joe Biden at the G7 summit in Italy this week, and mind you, that already happened. This was a week ago. Trudeau will probably not ask whether the U.S. is at risk of erupting into a civil war in the next few years. Next few years? Some of these other sites are saying it's already happening or it's going to happen by November. A think tank housed within Trudeau's government is already pondering that question. In a spring report titled Disruptions on the Horizon, a quiet office known as Policy Horizons Canada proposed American Civil War as a scenario that Ottawa should consider preparing for. This hypothetical was tucked into the middle of the 37-page document, which sketched the possibility in 15 spare words. U.S. ideological divisions, democratic erosion, and domestic unrest escalate, plunging the country into civil war. It's an unsettling thing to find out your immediate neighbor is getting nervous about the possibility of gruesome violence in your home. There has been no shortage of apocalyptic forecasting about Trump-era American politics. Since the 2016 election, left-leaning nonprofits, political consultants, and academics have indulged in endless speculation and role-playing exercises, ostensibly to help them defend democracy. I love how they say that. In practice, much of this has amounted to self-indulgence. One hysterical episode in 2020 involved a war games simulation that ended with Biden and his allies encouraging the entire West Coast to secede from the Union. Now, I tell you this, my friends. They say Tim Pool talks about civil war. The bots and the trolls say Tim Pool wants civil war. Despite the fact I say over and over and over again, no national divorce, no civil war, none of this. People, we get libertarians who come on Timcast and they're like, I think a peaceful national divorce is possible. It is not possible. Impossible. It won't happen. You will get some kind of regional violence, resource wars, especially considering, I don't know, nuclear weapons are all over the place and people are, I mean, that could be a deterrent, I suppose, but that means new power structures will form. And I don't know how you handle a problem like that. The Policy Horizons report struck me as different. Not dark fan fiction from American partisans, but a sober branch of a friendly foreign government contemplating our national crack-up. So how seriously should people take this on the other side of the 49th parallel? Well, they say that it's considered to be an ultra-high impact event, but improbable. They ranked it as improbable, but ultra-high impact. Improbable. To what degree? Is 49% improbable? I'd argue, yeah, but it really depends on what you mean. 49% is lower than chance, but still very likely to happen, right? Improbable. Does that mean 10%, 20%, 30%, 5%? We don't know. I don't know what they're looking at. But this is what's going around now. I love this from Snopes. Canada preparing for a second U.S. Civil War? Question mark. They say mixture. Mixture. They literally are. I don't understand. They drafted a report in which they said, though it's the things we need to be prepared for. I suppose you can say they're not preparing at all. They issued a report saying we should prepare for these things. And they went, OK, who cares? I'd argue the creation of the document itself, the warning, though improbable, of a potential U.S. Civil War is the beginning stages of their preparation, analyzing the problem. They say in April 2024, the Canadian government did publish a report saying the country needed to be prepared for a potential civil war in the U.S. What's false? The document did not say any preparations were underway. It also describes such an event as under-anticipated and listed it alongside 7 other under-anticipated disruptions and 10 more probable prominent disruptions. Yeah, it included biological weapons and other very serious and terrifying things, of which you'd probably beg for a civil war over, I don't know, like a biological weapons being released. Now, whether or not Canada is correct, I don't know. I don't care. But this one, this is where you start to pay attention. What are the investors saying? What are the investors doing? Financial Times reports the sell side obviously isn't talking about a second civil war. Should it? Here we go. Sell side research does the heavy lifting for investors seeking to quickly get up to speed on a whole range of issues, be it expectations for a firm's quarterly results or the forthcoming euro clearability of Korean government bonds. Ooh. In theory, any topic that has salience to investors and financial markets is fair game. But is that the only limitation? Does the street ever worry about looking a bit silly? Consider the U.S. election. Careful analysis has begun to land, picking apart the potential economic and market implications of different configurations of presidential and congressional power. A recent note from Goldman Sachs is a good example, concluding that In the grand scheme of things, the election won't have a big impact either way on stocks, but that dollar and bond yields could be flung around by large tariff increases. It's an interesting big picture stuff. Is the analysis complete? According to Goldman, no. They're right. We do not explicitly consider the tail risks from geopolitics. This sounds like an acknowledgement of tail risks that could matter to investors. Why exclude them? Maybe Goldman doesn't want to waste resources fussing on things that they strongly believe will never happen. Or maybe they don't want to write about things that would make them look alarmist. I want to stress this. What they're saying is, in their analysis about the election stocks and bonds, they're saying, we do not consider the tail risks from geopolitics. Geopolitics absolutely will play a role. They're not factoring that in. They're plugging their ears and saying, no. You know what I want to tell you guys? Optimism bias and normalcy bias. Normalcy bias is things like that never happen, so they can't. And optimism bias is, no, that's crazy. That'll never happen. And that's exactly what people are doing right now. In about a month, we are going to find out if they are putting the front runner for the U.S. presidency in prison. And we know there's no crimes. They go on Twitter and they say, a jury of his peers have found him guilty. No, they didn't. Shut up. No, they didn't. There's no argument. I don't care. You can say literally whatever you want. You are wrong. Your worldview is predicated upon garbled nonsense. I can argue 876 billion different ways you are a psychopath. Statute of limitations expired. Misdemeanor charge upgraded without an underlying crime known to the public. Spare me. Make any argument you want. You're not convincing anyone. And they're going to say, Trump supporters are insane. The jury chose. Well, we're not morons. I can only suppose that people on the right tend to be higher order thinkers than people on the left. People on the left will say things like, well, the jury said he's guilty, therefore he is. No. If you can't understand higher order thinking and you can't understand the subtleties and nuances of geopolitics and you think, but the jury said so, that's low order thinking. High order thinking is like recognizing that everything exists within a system. And that in New York, for instance, you have individuals who ran, like Bragg, explicitly on going after Trump, Letitia James, and then they did. And that they changed the rules to go after Trump. So we don't consider that legitimate. Bye. There's no fixing that. Some people are just too dumb or they just don't care. They want to win by any means necessary. And here we are. I'm not a diehard Trump supporter. I am a Trump supporter. I do think Trump is great. But there are a lot of people who would support wholeheartedly the same thing in the other direction. That is, if Trump was president and they were changing the rules to prosecute Democrats, there are a lot of Trump supporters that would cheer for it, just like there are Democrats that cheer for it. Me? I'm a realist. I care about functioning governance. I care about what is actually happening in this country. And that is, I didn't vote for Trump in the first place in 2016. And then throughout his first term, I was the stop making me defend Trump guy. No, he did not just arbitrarily do that thing. No, he did not call white nationalists fine people. You've made that up. That's a lie. And they say, you're right wing, you're a Trump supporter. I'm like, why? What are you talking about? I don't agree with him on these issues, but you're lying. That's where I am now. Burisma, they lied about it. Hunter Biden, they lied about it. They lied about the Hunter Biden laptop. They said it was Russian. It had all the hallmarks of Russian disinformation. Then they come back and say, we're liars for saying Biden appears to have frozen on stage and Obama pulled him away. It appeared to have. It was 7 or 8 seconds. It's not the first time he's frozen up. So I find it reasonable. They say you lied about him pooping during D-Day. There is more evidence that Joe Biden pooped his pants than the Hunter Biden laptop was part of a Russian disinformation scheme. I'm not saying he pooped his pants. I don't know. I have no idea. Maybe he did a weird squat thing that doesn't seem to make any sense and they can't explain. He was trying to sit down but then decided not to. What? Or he's an 80-year-old man suffering incontinence like many 80-year-old people. That's why they sell diapers. But I don't know. Maybe he didn't. I'm just saying there's more evidence he pooped his pants than there is the Hunter Biden laptop was part of a Russian disinformation scheme. I try to live in a world of reason where I base my decisions off of the probability of things being true so that in the long run, I have a high EV, as we call it, expected value. That's how I operate. If there's a 20% chance Biden pooped his pants, I consider that, which means I'm not going to weigh it very heavily, but I don't know, maybe. They just lie about everything. This is where we are at. They're trying to put Trump in prison despite Trump not breaking any laws. But the jury of his... Get out of here. Misdemeanor beyond a statute of limitations. Even if it were true, and I don't believe it is, Trump signed a bunch of checks that proves it. No, it doesn't. It proves literally nothing. But unreasonable, stupid people just go, but the jury said so. Well, here we are. Financial Times says, what sort of tail risks could fall into this category? Concerns that a chain of events will lead to China invading Taiwan are not unheard of. And despite Nigel Farage getting Trump to commit to staying in NATO, fears that Putin would use the opportunity of a Republican victory to invade Estonia continue to crop up. No way. Trump wins the presidency. The war is over. Okay? I'm being a little hyperbolic there, but Putin ain't going to be invading a NATO nation under Donald Trump. What likely will happen is Putin will offer a ceasefire and Trump will agree to it. Putin will seize the Donbass. He will maintain control of the Donbass region stretching down into Crimea, and the war will end. At least I hope so. And they say, but maybe the most risky of all tail risks that we've heard from at least one fund manager publicly discuss is the prospect the election kicks off a second U.S. Civil War. Let's imagine you're a hungry young analyst for whom the Second American Civil War is the topic you need to cover. How do you persuade your boss it's worth the time and reputational risk? Again, people don't want to say it. They don't want to say it because they think it sounds unreasonable. Don't know, don't care, shut up, and leave the room because the adults are talking. I have no problem suggesting that if I see the signs, the experts and historical rhyming of historical rhyming, I guess we can call it, things that are indicative of civil war based on what we've seen in the past. I'll put it that way. I got no problem saying I think it's possible we fall into civil war. But many of these people at these institutions are like, no, that's crazy. You can't say that. Why? Is a civil war likely in the U.S.? Take a look at this. Over the next 5 years, Rasmussen reports 40% believe it is either very or somewhat likely. The Economist shows slightly greater, around 42%, thinking in the next 10 years it is very likely or somewhat likely. Now, here's the fun part. A smaller percentage think it's not likely. You have roughly 35%. I'd say it looks about 35% saying, there we go. We can actually put the numbers. Let's see. 35% nailed it. Think that it is not likely. And then we have a 29% and 14%. So, yeah. I mean, what are we looking at? 43? I was off by 1. I don't know that it actually happens. I don't know what to tell you. In the Rasmussen report, around 50%, looks like 48%, 49% believe it's unlikely. In the YouGov, you've got 22% not sure. Not sure. Scary thought, isn't it? They say, we all know that people can answer polls weirdly and hilariously, so it's arguably irrelevant if hoi polloi report to pollsters that a civil war looks more likely than not over the next few years. That said, the prospect of an upcoming civil war does seem to worry some elites. You don't need to search hard to find politicians warning a civil war is a real possibility. They go to mention Ray Dalio, the founder and CIO mentor of the biggest hedge fund in the world, giving out interviews saying there's a maybe 40% chance of civil war. That's surely going to persuade your firm that this is research clients will want to read. What a civil war would mean for markets. We at Alphaville would love to see investment banks churn out a report with that name. This is partly because we can laugh at them when they turn out, in retrospect, to be alarmist, but also because there shouldn't really be taboos around putting thought to and publishing tail risk scenarios. How about this one? This is from the Telegraph. This is from a couple weeks ago. The United States is lurching towards civil war. November's election is now a referendum on whether Trump should go to prison or the White House. Here we go, baby. Common Dreams says the second U.S. Civil War has already begun. This time, the rebels are using their power inside the government and their influence through social media to subvert fundamental democratic institutions. You know why I will tell you I think civil war is coming? Prominent Democrat, progressive activist personalities write things like this. What are Republicans doing? What are Republicans doing? Nothing? Nothing? Meanwhile, you've got a guy who worked in the DOJ going to New York and working with Bragg, who campaigned on locking Trump up, bringing up charges that are beyond the statute of limitations that took place. They say Trump influenced the election, but the crime was committed after the election already happened. They're charging him for it. They changed the law so that E. Jean Carroll could accuse Trump in civil court of sexual abuse. They went after his businesses, claiming he was fraudulently submitting financial documents, despite the fact the bank said he wasn't. His lender said he did a great job. We made money. All of that is happening. Steve Bannon is going to prison. Peter Navarro is in prison. Trump's staffers are being targeted and imprisoned. The J6ers, some of them are in pretrial detention now. One guy for over 1,000 days, pre-trial detention. No trial. They've indefinitely detained him without cause. And they say, but the Republicans are doing this. This is a clever psychological tactic. They have begun to wage lawfare at every facet to destroy their enemies without this going hot. And their first assault, of course, is the legal system. Their second assault is to cover it up through the media by accusing Republicans of being the ones doing it. As anyone knows, Republicans are doing very little of anything. They can barely keep a speaker in the House. The New Republic. Are our oligarchs going to drag us into civil war? The billionaires who own the GOP are now actively promoting the same sort of revisionist history the Confederacy did. That did not go very well. Ha 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 ha. Very laughable. Very laughable. But we're here. We're looking at Financial Times, which I believe FT is British, isn't it? I could be wrong. I think it is. No, maybe not. I don't know. Let's double check. Because we know that the Trudeau thing, the Canada thing. Yeah, okay, it is British. I was right. It is British. So you've got a British paper and you've got a Canadian report suggesting there's some concerns here. Don't forget the Telegraph, of course, obviously British. And they're outright saying the U.S. is lurching towards a civil war. I don't care. You do whatever you want. Okay. You ignore me. That's fine. Maybe the election happens. Trump wins. Everyone claps. Biden walks up and says, you put up a heck of a fight, Donald, and I congratulate you on your victory. Do you really think that's going to happen? Sure, I guess. A lot of people are moving to El Salvador. For real. You know, it's the gamble. I've asked this question before. At what point does someone flee their country? And with what's happened to Bannon, Navarro, Trump's CFO, Alan Weisselberg, Trump himself, Trump's lawyers in Georgia and now Wisconsin, they are criminally charging Trump's lawyers for providing legal service. Jenna Ellis, the spineless coward, cries on camera, being like, Trump tricked me. That's nuts. I mean, some people got no spine, I guess. Bannon's got balls of steel. That dude's going to prison. He won't back down. But look what they're doing. Look what they're doing. What happens if Biden wins? I think a lot of people flee. Not to compare everything to World War II, but everyone does. But there's a good question that's brought up. A lot of Jews fled Germany early, and they made it to other countries safely. And many who stayed behind were summarily executed in camps. Why did these families decide to leave when they did? They started to see the signs being demonized, and they got worried and said, maybe we should leave. I was reading one story about how wealthy Jews who stayed behind, when it got really bad, offered to give up all of their possessions so they could leave and be allowed to leave. Because at that point, Germany was rounding them up, and they said, wait, don't take us, take our stuff, and we will peacefully go somewhere else. And they're like, okay. Because I guess the idea of being in the wilderness and living in a mud hut is better than an extermination camp. Now, that was an extreme circumstance. We didn't learn about the Holocaust until after we got there. There had been rumors, but that wasn't the reason for U.S. intervention. Once the U.S. got there, the U.S.'s policy was document as much of this as possible to let people know, like, this is what they were doing. There's a lot of history that people don't like to accept for like political reasons. Like the nuances of the Civil War in the United States are not just like, it was slavery, so we fight. It's like, dude, the Confederate soldiers in Virginia weren't fighting because of slavery. Only 5% of the South actually owned slaves. Slavery was a major component, but they were fighting because their homes were invaded. In Germany, yeah, Hitler singled out and targeted Jews, but there were also communists, Poles, gay people were all targeted as well. But of course, his major scapegoat, and if you ever listen to like one of his speeches, that dude was bonkers. I think everyone knows that. But there were nuances there in who he targeted as well. So there were a lot of Polish people who are not Jewish who were put in concentration camps as well. These things are important to understand as we're looking at what's going on today. Nobody will accept it. Nobody will believe it. Nobody wants to say that stuff will come here. And then it might. And what if it does? The question then is, at what point do you flee? It was funny because someone asked me on IRL, they're like, when was our crystal knocked? And I was like, the summer of love 2020. Come on, let's go, baby. Come on. Crystal knocked, of course, that people went around smashing up Jewish-owned businesses. And they were like, what do we have? We had BLM going around the country in the biggest riots in 50 years, smashing and burning down businesses. David, who was it? David Dorn? Was that his name? Cop got shot and killed. People were just destroying everything. There was a guy who's a firefighter, and he wanted to open a sports bar. They ransacked it. He's in there crying, being interviewed, being like, they destroyed everything I've dreamed of and worked for. They were robbing him on camera. The next night, they burned his building to the ground. Then people say, you really think there's going to be a civil war even with Summer of Love? January 6th. Come on. Dude, at what point? I got to tell you, man, those who, I know for everybody who like listens to all of my episodes, I'll stress this to you guys. Not everybody who watches my show watches every single video. I know that. And so people often say, I repeat myself too much. And I'm like, that's because you watch every single show. But if I don't explain something, that means the average person will be left confused. So I'm going to say this now. In revolutions, when you watch the Syrian civil war, you look at the videos, there's a guy walking down the street carrying grocery bags, rubble and gunshots, rubble everywhere, buildings destroyed, gunshots going off. Even in war, people still keep living. That means when you get into the thick of the conflict with the real potential for civil war or something to that effect, you're still going to be living your life. You're still going to watch TV. People don't get it. When I was in Egypt during the second revolution, it was actually really scary. I was in the Hilton, and reports came out that journalists were being rounded up and arrested live on TV. Apparently, it was just Al Jazeera at the time. I think it was just Al Jazeera, but it was outlets that had been sympathetic to the Muslim Brotherhood were getting raided by the government. People were watching TV as if nothing was happening. It's like, here's the news. People were going to the grocery store, eating McDonald's. And there was a revolution happening. APCs driving through the streets. People were jumping on them and riding them and screaming and cheering. And most people in the country were sitting in their houses being like, no idea. People don't understand. They think that when a revolution happens, everyone everywhere is running around screaming. When revolutions happen, 95% of the people are sitting in their houses eating stew, watching the TV, listening to the radio, reading the newspaper, talking to their friends and family. In fact, back in the day, many people wouldn't have even realized their government collapsed. They'd be out tending to the garden one day, and a guy would ride up on horseback and say, I'm in charge now. And they go, oh, whatever. Okay, I guess. So who knows? Who knows? But I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up at 1 p.m. on this channel. Thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you all then.